In this video, I'm going to show you the in-depth process how I paint small faces on fabric head forms. I use these heads for mop dolls, and I sell them for others to use for their dolls. But this process can be used for any type of doll head that you need to make. The important thing is to size your head for the project you're working on. I am using acrylic paint. Acrylic paint is a versatile paint because it can be used like watercolor paints, that is transparent, or it can be used in an opaque manner, meaning non-transparent. I use acrylic because it is permanent when it's dried. Watercolor is not permanent, so if the doll faces were exposed to water, their faces would run, and that would not be pretty if you used watercolor. You're probably wondering, but how can this be done? You're painting on fabric, which is a soft surface. I will explain. When I make these heads, I stuff the head very tightly, or packed firmly, so the surface does not feel soft and squishy. It is more like a stretched canvas, so the fabric is very taut. Sometimes when I pack them and sew up the seam, they kind of turn out to be a slightly different shape than my pattern. That's okay, because when the hair is applied, it will hide any imperfections of the shape of the head. The tools. To use acrylic paint as a watercolor, I thin it with water, or I use it very thinly so that it's transparent. That is good for when doing skin tones. But when I'm painting the eyes, eyelashes, eyebrows, and lips, I use the color straight from the tube. I do not want these details to be transparent. The small bottle of paint is craft paint, so it is naturally thin already. I use those mainly for the skin tones, but for the dark, opaque colors for the eye, lashes, brows, and lips, I use thicker paints, like from these tubes. The tube paint is a thicker bodied paint, which I typically use on a canvas painting. For my palette, I use a porcelain saucer. Since I'm using such a small amount of paint, these small plates or saucers are perfect for this project. I use porcelain because it can easily be washed off even if the paint dries on the plate. To clean the plates, I use hot water and I scrape with my palette knife or peel the paint off the plate. If you use plastic dishes or paper dishes, the paint would not wash off, nor would it peel off. Now, maybe sometimes it can peel off plastic, but I prefer porcelain. I usually look for white plates when I go to secondhand shops for this very purpose. I want plates with no raised design, but a very smooth finish. I like white so that I can see my paint colors. I use small paint brushes, which are the best tool for blending colors, softening edges, or gradating colors, helping them to fade away at the edges. Sometimes I paint with a toothpick. I feel that I have much more control by painting with the tiny tip of a toothpick. I wipe the tip off frequently to avoid paint buildup. If the tip breaks, or if the tip does become too big from paint buildup, I just toss it, grab a new one. Toothpicks are cheap. You also need to have a rag handy. I never paint without a rag nearby. When my towels get old and raggedy, I cut them up to add to my rag box. The texture of towels and washcloths make great rags for painting with acrylic. I do use old t-shirts for watercolor rags because t-shirt material is softer and watercolor brushes are more delicate. Acrylic brushes are usually stiffer, and they can take the rougher texture of towels and washcloths. The first thing I do is collect a variety of images of different faces. After sewing, stuffing, and closing up the head forms, I take a graphite pencil and sketch the main details of the faces, trying to cover the center of the face. You don't want to make the face too big. It's okay if there's extra space around the outside edges of the head form, because remember, the hair will cover part of that up. If you're not fully comfortable drawing faces, I would practice on paper first. Draw several. I've not tried erasing lines on the fabric forms, but I imagine that might be a little difficult to do. I'm drawing with a very light pencil. I'm not making heavy dark lines. They're very basic, and if I didn't draw it perfectly, I'll fix it with the paint job. You can see that I sketched the eye, the brow, the lips, and the nose. Be careful not to add too much detail around the nose. I mostly focus on the bottom side of the nose. I do not draw the sides of the nose. The shadows will be painted where shadows are needed, but I try to keep those shadows very subtle. The eyes are the most important facet to a face. The nose should only be a suggestion and not a dominant feature. I try to have a collection of various face forms with different personalities because it would be boring to paint the same face over and over again. I like to have fun too. Sometimes I do a child face for variety. I mostly do female faces because, well, women and children like dolls. I don't think there are many men who are interested in dolls, but I do plan on making some clown mup dolls, so I will be painting male clown faces at some point. I have done a couple already. I usually make myself a slideshow on my laptop so I can easily switch from slide to slide to paint another face. I make the faces as big as I can so I can study the details of it. I choose which of the slides, which face I feel like painting next. Then I dispense my paint colors onto my plate. Now I'm ready to begin painting. I choose the colors that might create a flesh tone, such as cream, tan, peach, pink, white, and brown. I often mix the colors to adjust the tone as needed. The painting process. I first mix the shade of flesh that I want for this face. I begin with a shadow under the eyebrow down to the crease line. Observe that I did not paint the eyelid itself because that area needs to be lighter to bring it forward. Whenever you paint a shadow, you're pushing that area back further. Lighter colors bring things forward, darker colors push them back. In a way, it's a type of sculpting. At least it looks like a sculpted face when it is finished. Looking at my photo reference, I decide that I need more white highlight just under the eyebrow. I add a little white, then wash my brush so I can come back and blend the two colors, softening the edge where the two colors meet. It is best to have a near empty brush for blending. It needs to be a little darker on the outside edge of the eye. I say darker, but I am working with light colors. I mean darker in relation to what I have already put on the area. Now I'm adding a little color on the eyelid. Now I need to darken the eye crease. The crease can be a little thicker on the outside of the eye, but it must become thinner towards the inside of the eye. Now I begin to add a little shadow under the eye. I wash my brush, then come back to blend or fade the bottom edge of the shadow that I just placed under the eye. I want to have a soft edge that fades away. I'm making a circular motion as I fade the lower edge of the shadow. Oops, that was too dark. Let me adjust the color by applying a lighter shade here on the left side of the nose. The shadow side of the face is the left side, so there will be more shadows on the left and less on the right. I wash my brush and then fade the outer edge of the shadow to the left of the nose. My brush has more wet than I wanted, so I dab it on the rag to remove excess water. Use of the rag helps me to control the water level. As I soften the edge, I am pulling a little bit of that shadow color away from the nose, which makes a lighter value of that color. This helps to give a soft edge to the shadow. All the while I am working, I continually judge my work, checking the values, if it is right or if it needs adjustment. Now I am mixing a lighter value for the right side, which has less shadow on it. I fill the area above the eye crease up to the eyebrow. In the center of my plate or palette, I add a drop of water so I can mix a thinner mix, a more transparent paint. I also lighten the color with some white. You probably can't see it so well, but I'm laying down a very light shadow on the right side of the nose. Remember, the left side is the shadow side and the right side is the highlighted side, which means light is coming from the right of the subject. As I did on the left side, I add a touch of white just under the eyebrow and then blend it softly. But to blend, I need to wipe my brush off. Must have less color or less paint on the brush when blending because I don't want to add more color. I want to blend what is already there. Now for the eye crease color. That is a bit too much. I wash my brush and then come back quickly to fade it away. I'm picking up paint, so I clean my brush again because as I fade, I want less paint. The shadow I am adding now is lighter than the previous shadow on the nose area. Now I am mixing a pale pink for the cheeks. I put a small amount of paint in the center of the cheek. Then I wash and dry my brush so I have no color on it. I come back and soften the outer edge of the cheek blush for a soft edge. I am vigorously going all the way around the outside edge of the cheek blush. Then I do the same for the other cheek. Now I am mixing to make a lighter color. I include a shadow in that vertical groove in the middle of the upper lip called the philtrum. I decided to contour the face a little bit by adding a bit of color under the chin, softening the inside edge of that shadow. Remember, we need a clean, almost dry brush for softening the edges or fading off the color. While I'm in the contouring mood, let's contour the sides of the face as well. The contour shadow touches the eye corner, which gives the illusion of the face being thinner or slightly indented right there. Wash, dry, then fade off the edges. Leaving the forehead unpainted makes it seem higher or wider. That looks good now. I need to do the same for the opposite side. Soften the edges as always. Now it's time for some lip color. Red is a mite too bright for this lady, so I tone it down with some pink and peach. Observe that I wash and dry my brush before picking up any new color. That keeps my colors clean. I do my mixing in the center of the plate. This is why I place my fresh colors on the outside edge of the plate. Once I'm happy with the color, I begin painting the underside of the upper lip and then frame the bottom lip. Now I add some white to the same color to lighten the value, making a highlight color for the lips. I paint the tops of both the upper and lower lips. I wash and then dry my brush because I'm going to change color again. I mix brown with my base lip color for a darker shadow for the corners of the mouth and inside between the two lips. This helps to parse the lips. I carefully follow the shape of the upper lip. Observe how I rest my pinky on the chin before I touch my brush to the lips. That helps to steady my hand. I almost always use my pinky finger as a stabilizer. Here I have it bent because it is a shorter distance to reach. More often you will see that finger extended. I shadow the underside of the lips because they were not quite dark enough. I'm always checking the values, light to dark, and making adjustments as needed in relation to the colors around it. The underside of the upper lip should be the darkest part of the lips. That same color will work well for the nostril holes, which is just a curved line, a shadow under the top inside opening of the nostril. I add the tiniest bit of shadow under the nostril openings. Do not overstate the nostrils. Many a person has ruined a portrait by making the entire nostril hole too dark. All it needs is a thin curved line at the inside top of the nostril and not too dark. Using the same color, I add a bit of shadow under the flesh part of the external nostril. More shadow around the left nostril, because that's the shadow side. Creating a two-dimensional face is all about controlling the values of the colors, from light to dark. I'm not giving specific colors because each face may be different. Some people's faces are pinker, some are browner, some are paler. Whatever overall tone you choose to lighten or darken the values as needed. I am again restating the eye crease. Wash, dry, because it's time for a new color. Next, I paint the whites of the eyes in both corners of each eye. I made these heads out of an old sheet, so it is near white, but has colored or grayed over time. I believe in recycling, reusing, or repurposing things to save money and not to be wasteful. You can see the white I am painting is whiter than the fabric. Normally, the whites of eyes are not perfectly white, but it'll work for this purpose. I paint all the way up to the irises of the eye. If I accidentally cover up part of the iris, no problem. I can correct that when I paint the irises. I added a couple of highlights on the nose in very specific places. The one I placed in shadow, the color underneath shows through somewhat, so it's not a bright highlight. The lips need some highlight too, in the center of the lower lip especially. Now it's time for eyebrows. The brown by itself is too dark, so I lighten it. Oh, no, that's too light. Needs more dark. Okay, I think I got it now. I hold my loaded brush about the painting to check the value, if it's right before touching the eyebrow with the wet brush. Then I brace my finger, having a good grip on the head with my left hand, bracing my right pinky to steady my hand. Then I begin painting the brows with short little strokes, starting with the thickest part, the inner brow. The inner brow should start just above the inside corner of the eye. It gets thinner toward the outside of the eye. The point ends just above the outside corner of the eye. I'm right-handed, so it is easier for me to do the right brow if I turn the head upside down. I lift my brush as I come out to the thinnest part of the eyebrow so that I don't paint too thick of a line. Gently lifting puts less paint down. Okay, she's starting to come alive. I reach for my toothpick for some small details. I deepened the crease one more time. After placing the brows, I felt I could go darker on the crease. It is always best to paint lighter, a little lighter the first time around. You can always come back and darken an area, but you don't want to start off too dark. So it's better to gradually go from lighter to a little bit darker to a little bit more darker, and then you're safe. Okay, for the eyes, I'm reaching for a new color. I've decided that these eyes for this lady will be a blue-green color. I first apply some green on the irises. I find that if my brush tip points toward the outside of the circle, I can do a better job of painting a perfect circle. So I turn my head as needed. As I apply the blue, I focus on the outermost edge of the iris. In most people's eyes, the eyelid will cover part of the top of the iris, but you will see the rounded part of the iris on the bottom side of the iris. Now I want a little highlight color. Still needs to be lighter. So I add a bit of white in the center of both irises. Clean my brush, then go back in and blend slightly to lighten the eye. Back to the toothpick. With the straight blue from the tube, unmixed color, I go around the outside edge of the iris, trying very carefully to maintain a perfect circle. I add extra blue on the top because the top of the iris should be darker. I know she may look a little bug-eyed right now, but wait until we get her lashes on, then she will look right. I will use some black in her lashes. The paint is thick, so I'm mixing some water to make it a little bit thinner. It is much easier to make fine lines with slightly thinner paint. I use a wet brush to thin the black paint, but I will paint the lashes with the toothpick. I don't want the lashes to be too black, so I mix some brown into the black, which gives me a dark brown color. I add the lash line first with the toothpick. The lash line can be thicker on the outside corners of the eye, but ought to be thinner on the inside corners of the eye. Then I push out some lashes. They can be longer on the outside corners of the eye, but get shorter as you come towards the inner corner. Add a pupil in the center of the iris. You see what a difference the lashes make. Then I add very short lashes on the bottom of the eye, but only 2/3 of the way from the outside corner. One tiny dot in the upper center of the nostril. Now she looks pretty. I am mixing some brown and red for a dark shadow color for the inside corners of the mouth and the underside of the upper lip. On second look, I felt her upper lip was too light, so I mix a darker shade to add a touch more color to the upper lip and the corners of the lower lip. giving her another look. One final touch is needed. She needs a highlight in her eye to give her a little spark. I reach for the white. Since I need the tiniest speck of white, I insert the toothpick in the opening of the tube to get some paint. I make sure that the tip of my toothpick is small, that I don't have any built-up paint residue on it. I need the smallest point to place the highlight. I chose to place it on the lower right side near the pupil. It's important that both highlights in each eye are in the same location. She is lovely, with soft, delicate features. I'm satisfied with her, so that means she's done. As an artist, we don't stop painting until we're happy with our work. I hope you enjoyed this and that you'll give it a try.